Hi, today I wanted to talk about quick body turns, and in particular I wanted to talk about in my M1 characters. I initially had a body turn bone in my first set of characters. I'm creating another set of characters, but I'm not going to put the body turn bone in there, and I'm going to show you why that is and how to deal with that if you want to do something with those characters. So the body turn bone was put in just because it makes it easy. So for example, if I move my character around, I can quickly just change his body position and manipulate things fairly easily. So that's the reason. But if you'll notice, as I turn the body, I still have to tweak the positions a little bit, and I'd use onion skins and things like that to get things lined up properly. But that's the reason that the body turn bone was originally put in. So now, why am I taking that bone out in some of my newer characters? And that's because as I turn this body, notice this character is done exactly the same way, with one exception that I'll talk about in a bit. And you'll notice, look at his vest. By turning, these points just really kind of seem to mess up. They don't really keep the shape that I wanted to keep. Now for this character, I am creating him in Moho 12, so I think that this has to do with mainly about the Bezier handles, but specifically the reason this happens is because in this particular character many of these points are just flexi bound. So let me compare that to my original character. So if we zoom into the original character and I select the point binding, the bind points tool, I can see that most of the points in the areas of interest up in the shoulders and even in the waist are point bound. And if I look at the outline of his body, there's only 2 points that are not point bound. These also in the collar, but specifically I'm looking at the shape of the body. If I look at this other character, we can see, and do the same thing, we can see that there are a lot of points that aren't point bound. And as I go to a frame that's non-zero, we can see that those particular points are the ones that are causing some problem. Now, maybe someone has a technique that can help these curvatures be proper, and you can see the collar as well, these kinds of things. But I surely don't want to go to individual points and deal with those Bezier curves to get the curvature right, just to have that body bone working properly. So let's look very quickly at the body turn and what was happening in these characters. And I brought up another character that again has this time of flexi binding around his torso. And so all I would typically do in the body turn action is I would select this hip bone, this root bone, and then I would flip it end to end. And when I do that, and then I would make adjustments because of the shifting, and I'd make adjustments with all the bones and things. But if you look here, as soon as I flip that bone, the shape of this lower portion of his tunic just doesn't look good at all. And I had similar situations with the feet and different things like that if they weren't point bound. So that's the problem. So now the question is, if I have an M1 character that doesn't have a body bone, how do I do that kind of flip? What's the easiest way? Maybe other people can give me some hints on this, but the best way that I've found is I just am going to animate the character in a more standard fashion. In other words, I don't have to use smart bones for everything. And specifically what I'll do is I'm not going to bone flip. I'm not going to flip this root bone end to end. Instead, I'm going to flip the entire layer. I did try doing a body bone to flip this layer, but what happens is the positioning of the character was problematic. So again, if other people have better ways to resolve that, I'd love to hear from you. But let me just show you how I'm going to be doing this. So let's just assume that your character has moved, and that's an important point. You know, the character has moved within the frame, and I've used this root bone to move. So I'm going to go to frame 24 and do my animation. So I'm going to move my character. Let me zoom in a little bit. And I'm just going to press Alt and move that root bone. And then I'll go ahead and move these other bones. And I could have just used the bone manipulation tool and moved that root bone. So that character, let's just assume, has been walking. I'm not going to do a whole walk cycle, but let's just assume that he's walked across the screen a little bit. And now at this point in time, let's assume that I want to turn him and walk back or do something else. Maybe he hears something on the next frame. So what I'm going to do on frame 25 is I'm going to go to the layer and the transform layer tool, and I'm going to flip the entire layer. Now notice what happens is he'll flip way over there because it depends upon the orientation. Now I don't know if you can animate that. I haven't played with that much, but it's a fairly simple thing to deal with. And in many ways this is actually a better turn because the feet, I don't have to reposition them. So that flipping the entire layer works very well. So for manipulating the character himself and moving him across the screen, I do that, but then I just flip the layer to make the body turn. But of course we want him to seem like he turns in place. We don't want him to flip across the screen. So I'm going to turn on the onion skins, and I'm just going to now press Shift to keep the layer from going up and down and just transform him horizontally. And I'm going to move him basically back to where he should be. Now notice in this particular case what's happening is the onion skins are moving, and that's because this layer its position is transforming over time. And by the way, if you don't know this, in Moho 12 I'm going to zoom in by clicking on that, and it's a little bit nicer. So what I want is the position to stay the same up to frame 24, so I'm going to Control C to copy that, go to frame 24, Control V, and now we just have that character. Now this movement here is as if he's walking, but the layer itself is not moved. So the layer, if you can see these handles over here, the layer is not moving between frames 1 and 24. And so I need to move it over a little bit more, I think. So that character, actually I moved him a little bit too much, so let me move him back a little bit. Yeah, so there we go. Now we have the character lined up, and so I can do that body turn just like that. So again, this part is him walking. I'm simulating the walking, but the body turn, all I really needed to do was flip that layer and create a keyframe just before the flip so that the frame was in the proper place.